The sun-bleached town of Redemption, Wyoming Territory, 1876, held its breath as Virginia Vance stood on the auction block. Her honey-blonde hair matted against her face and her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. The crowd of rough-hewn men jostled for position, their hungry eyes appraising her like she was nothing more than livestock. Virginia kept her chin high, despite the humiliation burning through her veins. 3 days ago, she'd been traveling west with hopes of starting anew as a schoolteacher. Now, after bandits attacked her stagecoach, killed the driver, and discovered she couldn't pay their demanded toll, she found herself being sold to cover her supposed debt, a barbaric practice that still persisted in these lawless territories. $5, shouted a toothless miner. 10, countered a red-faced cattle baron. Virginia fought back tears. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. $15 for the pretty little thing, called out a voice thick with liquor. The auctioneer, a man with a potbelly straining against a dirty vest, grinned. $15. Do I hear 20? Virginia scanned the crowd desperately. Most faces reflected only cruel interest or indifference, until her gaze locked with a pair of steel-blue eyes at the back of the gathering. A tall man in a dust-covered duster stood apart from the others, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. $20, shouted another voice. 25, countered someone else. The bidding escalated as Virginia's hope dwindled. Who would help her in this God-forsaken place? $100, came a clear, steady voice that cut through the clamor. The crowd fell silent, parting to reveal the blue-eyed stranger stepping forward. He walked with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger, spurs jingling softly with each step. "Well now," the auctioneer drawled, suddenly interested. "Seems we have a real contender." $100 from Mr. Finley Hayes, the stranger supplied, his voice carrying a hint of Texas in its cadence. The auctioneer grinned. $100 from Mr. Hayes. Do I hear 110? The cattle baron glared. 110. 150, Finley countered without hesitation. Virginia watched this exchange with growing disbelief. Why would this stranger bid so high for her? The possibilities made her stomach twist with dread. 200, the cattle baron growled, his jowls quivering with anger. Finley Hayes didn't even blink. 300. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That was more than a month's wages for most men present. 300 going once. The auctioneer called, his eyes gleaming with greed. The cattle baron spat on the ground. 350. $500, Finley said calmly. Gasps echoed around the dusty square. The cattle baron's face purpled, but he fell silent. 500 going once, going twice. The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air. Sold to Mr. Hayes for $500. Virginia's knees weakened as Finley approached the auction block. He pulled out a leather pouch and began counting coins onto the auctioneer's table. Gold eagles clinked against the wood, followed by silver dollars and smaller coins. When the pouch was empty, he turned out his pockets, adding every last cent. "That's $493.65, he said, removing his pocket watch and chain. "This should cover the rest and more." The auctioneer examined the timepiece and nodded. "Done. She's yours." Virginia's heart hammered against her ribs as Finley came to her side. Instead of grabbing her arm as she expected, he pulled a knife from his belt. Her breath caught until he sliced through the ropes binding her wrists. "Miss, I believe you're free to go," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers directly. Virginia stared at him in disbelief. "What?" "I said you're free." He sheathed his knife. "No one has the right to sell another human being. Not here, not anywhere." The crowd began to disperse, grumbling their disappointment. The auctioneer counted his money, unconcerned with the outcome now that he had his commission. "Why?" Virginia whispered, rubbing her raw wrists. "Why would you spend every cent you have on a stranger?" A ghost of a smile touched Finley's lips. "Because it was the right thing to do, madam. Now may I escort you somewhere safe? This town doesn't seem particularly friendly." Virginia glanced around at the hostile faces. "I don't have anywhere to go. They took everything I had." Finley nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "Then I suggest we leave Redemption behind. I'm headed to Silver Creek. It's a decent town about 2 days' ride from here." "You'd be welcome to travel under my protection." Virginia hesitated, trusting a stranger had gotten her into this mess. But something in Finley Hayes' steady gaze told her he was different. "I don't even know you, Mr. Hayes." "No, you don't," he agreed. "But I promise you this: you'll be safer with me than alone in this town. And when we reach Silver Creek, you'll be free to go your own way." Virginia considered her options, which were painfully few. "Very well, Mr. Hayes. It seems I'm in your debt." "No, madam," he corrected gently. "You don't owe me anything. Your freedom wasn't mine to give, it was always yours by right." As they walked toward the livery stable, Virginia studied her unexpected savior. Finley Hayes stood over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that tapered to a lean waist. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he was in his early 30s. Despite his rugged appearance, there was something refined in his manner. "My horse is this way," he said, leading her to a handsome chestnut gelding. "Have you ridden before, Miss?" "Vance, Virginia Vance," she supplied. "And yes, I grew up riding in Kentucky." Something flickered in his eyes. "Kentucky, that's a long way from Wyoming." "Yes, well, there wasn't much left for me there after the war." Virginia didn't elaborate. The memories of her family's plantation reduced to ashes, her parents in the cemetery, and her brother never returning from Shiloh were still too painful. Finley nodded, understanding in his expression. "War has a way of uprooting folks." He adjusted the saddle on his horse. "I'll need to get you a mount. Wait here." Virginia watched as he approached a trader at the edge of town. After a brief conversation and the exchange of his silver spurs, Finley returned leading a small paint mare. "She's not much to look at, but the trader says she's gentle and sure-footed," Finley explained, handing Virginia the reins. "You've already given everything for me," Virginia protested. "Your money, your watch, and now your spurs." "Just metal and leather," he said with a shrug. "Not worth fretting over." They rode out of Redemption as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. Virginia felt the hostile stares following them, but refused to look back. Whatever lay ahead couldn't be worse than what she'd just escaped. As they crested a ridge overlooking a vast, rolling prairie, Virginia finally allowed herself to breathe freely. "Mr. Hayes, I don't know how to thank you properly." "You could start by calling me Finley," he suggested, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Mr. Hayes was my father." "Only if you'll call me Virginia." "Fair enough, Virginia." They rode in companionable silence as the sun dipped toward the western horizon. The endless sky gradually transformed from blue to a palette of orange and pink. Despite her exhaustion, Virginia found herself stealing glances at her rescuer. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel secure for the first time in days. "We should make camp soon," Finley observed, scanning the terrain. "There's a creek about a mile ahead with good cover." Virginia nodded, suddenly aware of how sore and tired she was. The events of the day had taken their toll. The campsite Finley chose was sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods beside a clear, shallow creek. He helped Virginia dismount, his hands strong but gentle at her waist, and she fought the unexpected flutter in her stomach at his touch. "Can you gather some kindling while I see to the horses?" he asked, already loosening the saddle on his gelding. Virginia welcomed the task, grateful to make herself useful. As she collected dry sticks and branches, she reflected on how drastically her circumstances had changed in a matter of hours, from captive to free woman, from despairing to, what, hopeful. That seemed too strong a word, but something had definitely shifted within her. When she returned to camp, Finley had already laid out a fire ring and was unpacking his saddlebags. He looked up as she approached, offering a brief smile that transformed his serious features. "Good timing," he said, taking the kindling. "I was beginning to think you'd made a run for it. And leave behind my only ally in this wilderness." Virginia returned his smile. "I'm not that foolish." Finley built the fire with practiced efficiency. Soon, flames were dancing merrily, pushing back the encroaching darkness. He produced a small pot, some coffee beans, and a packet of dried beef. "It's not much," he apologized, "but it'll keep us going until we reach better provisions." "It's a feast compared to what I've had these past few days," Virginia assured him, accepting a tin cup of hot coffee with grateful hands. As they ate, Virginia studied Finley across the firelight. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "What made you stop at that auction?" "You could have ridden past, like so many others must have." Finley was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "I've seen too much suffering in my life to ignore it when I can do something about it." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "After the war, I swore I'd never stand by while injustice happened in front of me." "You fought Confederate cavalry under General Forrest," he said, a shadow crossing his face. "Saw things no man should see. Did things I wish I could forget." Virginia nodded, understanding all too well. "My brother joined the Kentucky Volunteers for the Union. He never came home." "I'm sorry," Finley said softly. "War makes enemies of people who might have been friends in another life." "Yes," Virginia agreed, surprised by the insight. "It does." They lapsed into silence, each lost in memories. Finally, Finley cleared his throat. "You should get some rest. I'll keep watch for a while." Virginia hesitated, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, alone in the wilderness with a man she'd met only hours ago. Sensing her unease, Finley gestured to a bedroll he'd laid out near the fire. "You take that. I'll be over by that tree. You're safe with me, Virginia. You have my word." Something in his steady gaze convinced her. "Thank you, Finley, for everything." She settled onto the bedroll, pulling the rough blanket around her shoulders. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Virginia watched as Finley sat with his back against a cottonwood, his rifle across his knees, a silhouette against the star-studded sky. What kind of man gave everything he had to free a stranger? Virginia had grown up believing in the innate goodness of people, but the war and its aftermath had stripped away that innocence. Yet here was Finley Hayes, challenging her hard-won cynicism with a single selfless act. As she drifted toward sleep, Virginia realized that for the first time in years, she felt something dangerously close to hope. Morning came with birdsong and the soft nickering of horses. Virginia opened her eyes to find Finley already awake, tending a small fire with coffee brewing. His face was freshly shaved, his dark hair damp from the creek. "Good morning," he said, noticing her stirring. "Sleep well." Virginia sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. "Better than I expected. You should have woken me for my turn at watch. You needed the rest." He poured coffee into a tin cup and offered it to her. "We have a long ride ahead today." Virginia accepted the coffee gratefully, its warmth and bitterness helping to clear the fog from her mind. "Where exactly is Silver Creek?" "Northwest of here, nestled in the foothills before the mountains proper. Good little town. They're building a proper school, might be looking for a teacher." Virginia nearly choked on her coffee. How did you know I was a teacher? Finley's lips quirked. You mentioned yesterday you were heading west to be a school teacher. Did I? Virginia couldn't remember sharing that detail. Not directly, he admitted. But when you were on that auction block, I overheard you telling the auctioneer you had a teaching position waiting. I put the pieces together. Virginia felt a flutter of unease. You were watching before the auction began. I was in town getting supplies when I saw them bring you in. His expression darkened. I tried to intervene then, but the sheriff, if you can call him that, said it was a legal debt collection since you'd apparently agreed to pay a toll for safe passage. That's absurd. I never agreed to anything. Those men attacked our stagecoach, killed the driver, and when they found I had little money, they claimed I owed them for protection I never asked for. Finley nodded grimly. Road agents operating with the sheriff's blessing. It's not uncommon in these parts. The law is still catching up to the territory. They broke camp efficiently, and soon were riding across the rolling prairie. The day grew warm, but a pleasant breeze kept it from becoming uncomfortable. Virginia found herself relaxing in the saddle, occasionally stealing glances at her companion. "Tell me about Silver Creek," she prompted. "What takes you there?" Finley adjusted his hat against the sun. "I have some business with the marshal, an old friend from the war, and I'm overdue for some civilization after months on the trail." "What kind of business keeps you on the trail for months?" A smile touched his lips. "The boring kind. I scout for the army sometimes, guide settlers, hunt bounties when necessary. Lately, I've been tracking wild horses for the Army Remount Service." "That doesn't sound boring at all," Virginia said. "It sounds like freedom." Finley glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "It can be lonely." The simple admission hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. Virginia changed the subject. "How much farther to Silver Creek?" "We should reach it by tomorrow afternoon if the weather holds. There's a way station about 10 miles ahead where we can rest the horses and maybe get a proper meal." They rode steadily through the morning, the landscape gradually changing as they moved northwest. The flat prairie gave way to gently rolling hills dotted with stands of pine and aspen. By midday, Virginia could make out the silhouette of mountains in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. "It's beautiful," she breathed, reining in her mare to take in the view. Finley pulled his gelding alongside hers. "Different from Kentucky, I imagine. Very, but wonderful in its own way." Virginia turned to him. "Have you always lived out west?" "Born in Texas, but I've been roaming these territories since the war ended. Seems I've got restless feet." He squinted at the horizon. "There's the way station just ahead." The way station was little more than a sturdy log building with a stable attached, but to Virginia, it looked positively luxurious after a night on the ground. A weathered sign proclaimed, "Jackson's Rest Meals, Beds, Feed." As they dismounted, an older man with a magnificent white beard emerged from the building. "Welcome, travelers. Name's Jackson. What can I do for you?" "Hoping to rest the horses and get some hot food," Finley replied, offering his hand. "Finley Hayes." "Hayes?" Jackson's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Not the same Hayes who tracked down the Blackwater gang 2 years back." Virginia looked at Finley with newfound curiosity. "That was a long time ago," Finley said, clearly uncomfortable with the recognition. Jackson grinned. "Well, I'll be. Meals are on the house for you and your lady friend. Any man who brought those murderers to justice deserves at least that much." "That's not necessary," Finley began, but Jackson was already waving them inside. "I insist. Got venison stew on the fire and fresh bread cooling. You tend to your horses and I'll have it ready when you come in." As they led their mounts to the stable, Virginia couldn't contain her curiosity. "The Blackwater gang," Finley sighed. Like I said, I take bounty hunting jobs sometimes. The Blackwater gang robbed a stagecoach carrying Army payroll and killed 6 people, including a woman and child. The Army wanted them found. And you found them. It wasn't a question. I tracked them through 3 territories, Finley said, loosening his horse's saddle. Brought 2 in alive for trial. The others didn't give me that option. Virginia absorbed this information as she cared for her mare. Finley Hayes was clearly more than just a wandering cowboy. He had skills, dangerous ones, and a reputation. Yet he had used those same skills to save her, spending every cent he had in the process. The contradiction intrigued her. Inside, Jackson's stew proved to be everything promised: rich, savory, and filling. Virginia hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate with unladylike enthusiasm, only slightly embarrassed when she caught Finley watching her with amusement. "When was the last time you ate properly?" he asked. Virginia considered. "Before the stagecoach was attacked, so 4 days ago." A shadow crossed Finley's face. "I'm sorry for what happened to you." "It wasn't your doing," Virginia replied, surprised by his apology. "No, but men like me are supposed to make these territories safe for folks like you. We're failing if women can still be sold on auction blocks for made-up debts." There was a passion in his voice that caught Virginia off guard. Before she could respond, Jackson returned with coffee and a small cloth bundle. "Thought the lady might appreciate some clean clothes," he said, placing the bundle beside Virginia. "They belonged to my daughter before she moved to Denver with her husband. Nothing fancy, but they're clean." Virginia was touched by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Jackson. That's tremendously thoughtful." The old man waved away her thanks. "Got a wash room out back if you want to freshen up. My Eliza always said a clean face makes for a new perspective." After 4 days in the same dusty, travel-stained dress, the prospect of clean clothes and a wash was irresistible. Virginia excused herself, bundle in hand. The washroom was a small shed with a large copper tub, a mirror, and, miracle of miracles, a bar of lavender soap. A wooden bucket of clean water sat beside a small stove that kept another pot of water warm. Virginia nearly wept at the simple luxury. She stripped off her soiled dress, used a cloth to wash away days of grime, and reveled in the sensation of being clean again. Her honey blonde hair, when brushed out with the comb provided, fell in waves past her shoulders. The clothes Jackson had given her were simple, but well-made: a blue calico skirt, a cream-colored blouse, and even clean underthings wrapped discreetly in the center of the bundle. The skirt was a bit short, ending at her ankles rather than the floor, but it was heavenly compared to her ruined traveling dress. When Virginia returned to the main room, she found Finley and Jackson deep in conversation that abruptly ceased as she entered. Both men stood, and Virginia was startled by the expression on Finley's face, a mix of surprise and something that might have been admiration. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "You look rested." Jackson chuckled. "What the gentleman means is that you clean up real nice, miss." Virginia felt a blush warming her cheeks. "Thank you both, Mr. Jackson. I cannot express my gratitude enough for your kindness." "Think nothing of it," Jackson insisted. "Now I've made up the spare room for you. It's small but private. Mr. Hayes can bunk in the common room." Virginia glanced at Finley, who nodded. "We'd be grateful for proper beds tonight. We'll be on our way at first light." "No rush," Jackson said. "Silver Creek ain't going nowhere." That evening, after a simple but satisfying supper, Virginia found herself sitting on the way station's small porch, watching as the setting sun painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. The air was cooling rapidly, but she didn't mind. After days of fear and uncertainty, this moment of peace felt like a precious gift. She heard the door open behind her but didn't turn, somehow knowing it was Finley. He settled onto the bench beside her, offering a steaming cup of tea. Jackson said this might ward off the evening chill, he explained. Virginia accepted the cup gratefully. He's a kind man. They are still out there, good people doing good things even in rough places. Finley gazed at the sunset. Sometimes I need reminding of that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their tea as darkness gradually claimed the landscape. Stars appeared one by one, brilliant against the deepening blue-black sky. "May I ask you something, Virginia?" "Of course. What will you do when we reach Silver Creek?" Virginia considered the question. "Find work, I suppose. I still hope to teach, but I'm not above taking other positions if necessary. I can sew fairly well, and I've kept books for my father's business." "No family waiting for you somewhere?" "No," she said softly. "The war took my brother. Typhoid took my parents 2 years later. I taught at a girls' school in Louisville until it closed for lack of funds. West seemed the only direction offering any promise." Finley nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The war left many of us without anchors." "And you?" Virginia ventured. "No family." A shadow crossed his face. "My parents had a small ranch near San Antonio. Raiders hit it during the war while I was away fighting. By the time I made it home, there was nothing left but charred timber and graves." "I'm sorry," Virginia whispered, instinctively placing her hand on his arm. Finley looked down at her hand, then back to her face. Something passed between them, a recognition of shared loss, perhaps, or simply human connection after too much solitude. The moment stretched, fragile and charged with unspoken possibility. Then Jackson's voice called from inside, breaking the spell. "Got fresh coffee if anyone's interested." Finley cleared his throat. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Virginia withdrew her hand reluctantly. "Yes, you're right." As she rose to go inside, Finley spoke again. "Virginia," she turned. "Yes, I'm glad I was in redemption yesterday." The simple statement warmed her more than the tea had. "So am I, Finley, so am I." That night, in the small but clean room Jackson had provided, Virginia lay awake thinking about the man sleeping in the common room below. Finley Hayes was an enigma, a fearsome bounty hunter who gave his last cent to free a stranger. A former Confederate soldier who treated her with unfailing respect. A man who seemed both hardened by life, yet capable of extraordinary kindness. It was dangerous, she knew, to feel this growing attachment. They would reach Silver Creek tomorrow, and their paths would likely diverge. Finley Hayes wasn't the settling type he'd as much as said so himself, and Virginia needed stability after so much upheaval. Still, as sleep finally claimed her, Virginia couldn't help wondering what it might be like if their roads continued together beyond Silver Creek. Dawn broke clear and cold, with frost glittering on the grass surrounding Jackson's way station. Virginia dressed quickly in her borrowed clothes, grateful for their warmth. When she descended to the main room, she found Finley and Jackson sharing coffee by the fire. "Good morning, Miss Vance," Jackson greeted cheerfully. "Sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Virginia replied, accepting the cup of coffee Finley offered her. "I can't remember the last time I slept in such comfort." "Glad to hear it. Got flapjacks coming up for breakfast before you head out." After a hearty breakfast, Virginia and Finley prepared to depart. Jackson refused payment, waving away Finley's attempts to give him the few coins he'd found in his saddlebags. "Consider it payment for bringing justice to the Blackwater gang," the old man insisted. "Besides, it's been a pleasure having company." When Virginia tried to return the borrowed clothes, Jackson shook his head. "Keep them, miss. My Eliza would be pleased to know they're being used by someone who needs them." Virginia embraced the old man impulsively. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Jackson. I won't forget it." As they mounted their horses, Jackson called out, "Safe travels to Silver Creek. Tell Marshal Daniels that old Jackson sends his regards." They rode steadily throughout the morning, the terrain growing increasingly rugged as they approached the foothills. Pines replaced the scattered cottonwoods, and the air took on the crisp scent of evergreen and mountain soil. Virginia found herself relaxing into the rhythm of travel, comfortable with both her horse and her companion. Around midday, they stopped by a clear mountain stream to rest and water the horses. Virginia splashed cold water on her face, relishing its bracing freshness. "How much farther to Silver Creek?" she asked, watching as Finley refilled their canteens. "We should see it by late afternoon," he replied, scanning the horizon. "The trail follows this valley for a few more miles, then climbs that pass." He pointed to a gap between two forested ridges. "Will you stay in Silver Creek long?" The question slipped out before Virginia could stop herself. Finley glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I hadn't planned that far ahead. Depends on what Marshal Daniels needs." Virginia nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course he wouldn't stay. Men like Finley Hayes didn't put down roots. They remounted and continued their journey, the trail gradually ascending toward the pass. As they rode, Finley pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area, a ridge where Shoshone hunters once tracked elk, a meadow famous for its summer wildflowers, a distant peak named for a French trapper who claimed to have seen a golden eagle the size of a small house. Virginia found herself captivated, not just by the stories, but by the man telling them. When Finley spoke of the land, animation crept into his normally guarded expression. His knowledge revealed years of careful observation and genuine appreciation for the wild beauty surrounding them. "You love it out here, don't you?" she asked during a lull. "The open country," Finley considered. "I suppose I do. It's honest at least. The mountains don't pretend to be anything but what they are." "Unlike people," Virginia suggested. "Some people," he agreed, a wry smile touching his lips. "Others are as straightforward as these peaks, just harder to find." They were nearing the top of the pass when Virginia's mare suddenly shied, nearly unseating her. Virginia managed to stay mounted, but the mare backed nervously, ears flattened. "Whoa, easy," Virginia soothed, trying to control the agitated horse. Finley's hand went to his revolver as he scanned the trail ahead. Something spooked her. A low growl came from the rocks beside the trail. Virginia's heart hammered as she caught sight of tawny fur and gleaming eyes, a mountain lion, crouched on a boulder not 20 feet away. "Don't move," Finley said quietly, his voice steady despite the danger. "Keep your horse calm if you can." The big cat's tail twitched as it watched them, muscles tensed for a potential leap. Virginia's mare trembled beneath her but miraculously remained in place. Slowly, Finley drew his revolver. "I don't want to kill it if I don't have to." "What are you going to do?" Virginia whispered, her mouth dry with fear. "When I give the word, move your horse backward, nice and easy. I'll cover you." Virginia nodded, gathering the reins with shaking hands. "Now," Finley said softly. Virginia gently urged her mare to back up. The horse obeyed, taking cautious steps away from the perceived threat. The mountain lion's attention shifted to Finley, who remained in place, revolver aimed at the predator. "That's it," he murmured to Virginia. "Keep going." When Virginia had retreated about 50 feet, Finley suddenly fired a shot into the air. The explosion echoed across the valley, and the startled mountain lion bounded away into the underbrush. Virginia exhaled shakily, only then realizing she'd been holding her breath. That was too close. Finley holstered his weapon and turned his horse to join her. They usually avoid people, but this one seemed unusually bold. Might be hungry or protecting cubs nearby. "Thank you," Virginia said, still calming her nervous mare. "You handled that perfectly." "Not the first cat I've encountered," Finley said with a slight smile. "Won't be the last. Let's keep moving. We're nearly to the pass." They continued upward, both alert for any further signs of wildlife. When they reached the top of the pass, Virginia gasped at the vista spread before them. A verdant valley opened up below, with a silver ribbon of river winding through its center. Near a bend in the river, a collection of buildings formed a neat grid silver creek. "It's beautiful," Virginia said, taking in the peaceful scene. "It's a good town," Finley agreed. "Settled by mostly decent folk. They've got Aspirations Bank, hotel, newspaper, and that school I mentioned." Hope stirred in Virginia's chest. Perhaps Silver Creek could be the fresh start she'd been seeking when she left Kentucky. The trail down from the pass zigzagged along the mountainside, offering changing perspectives of the valley below. As they descended, details of the town came into clearer focus: white-painted buildings, a church steeple, corrals of horses, wagons moving along the main street. The sun was low in the western sky when they finally reached level ground. They followed the river's course toward town, passing scattered homesteads and small farms along the way. Virginia noticed how people working their fields would pause to wave at Finley, who returned the greetings with a nod or raised hand. "They know you," she observed. "I've passed through a few times," he acknowledged. "Helped the marshal with some trouble last year." As they approached the town limits, Virginia felt an unexpected flutter of nerves. What awaited her in Silver Creek? Would she find the welcome and opportunity she hoped for, or more disappointment? The main street was busy with early evening activity: shopkeepers closing up for the day, ranch hands heading toward the saloon, families gathering for supper. Virginia was conscious of curious glances as she and Finley rode past. They stopped in front of a solid two-story building with Marshal's office painted on a wooden sign. Finley dismounted and helped Virginia down from her mare, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. "I should speak with Marshal Daniels," he said. "Then we can see about finding you accommodations." Virginia nodded, suddenly reluctant to part from him, even temporarily. "I'll wait here." Finley hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then nodded and entered the building. Left alone, Virginia took the opportunity to study the town. Silver Creek appeared prosperous and well-maintained. The buildings were mostly wooden, but several brick structures suggested permanence and stability. She noticed a millinery shop, a dress shop, a general store, and her heart leapt. A schoolhouse at the far end of the street. "You must be the lady Finley rescued." Virginia turned to find a woman in her 50s watching her with kind eyes. She wore a simple but well-made dress, and her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical bun. "I am," Virginia confirmed. "Virginia Vance." "Martha Wilson," the woman offered her hand. "I run the boarding house down the street. Finley's friend Daniels sent word you might need a place to stay." Virginia blinked in surprise. "He did, but we only just arrived." Martha chuckled. "News travels fast in Silver Creek, especially when Finley Hayes rides into town with a beautiful young woman. Come along, dear. You look like you could use a hot bath and a proper meal." Uncertain, Virginia glanced at the marshal's office. "But Finley knows exactly where to find you," Martha assured her. "The men will be talking business for a while. No sense in you standing around waiting." Virginia reluctantly allowed herself to be led down the street to a large, welcoming house with a wide porch. A hand-painted sign proclaimed it: "Wilson's Boarding House, clean rooms, good food, fair prices." Inside, The house smelled of baking bread and furniture polish. Martha showed Virginia to a small but comfortable room on the second floor with a real bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "The washroom's down the hall," Martha explained. "I'll have hot water brought up for you. Supper's at 6 sharp, Mrs. Wilson," Virginia said hesitantly. "I must tell you that I have very little money. I'm not sure I can afford." Martha waved away her concerns. "Finley's taken care of it. He arranged credit for you until you're settled." Virginia stared at the older woman in disbelief. "He did? But he's already given so much." "That's Finley Hayes for you," Martha said with a knowing smile. "He doesn't do anything halfway. Now, get yourself cleaned up. There's a trunk of clothes in the attic that belonged to my daughter. She moved to California last year. You're welcome to look through it after supper." When Martha left, Virginia sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events and by Finley's continued generosity. The man had spent his last cent freeing her from the auction block, and now he was ensuring she had comfortable lodging in Silver Creek. Why would he do so much for a stranger? And why did the thought of him leaving, as he inevitably would, create such an ache in her chest? By the time Virginia had bathed and changed back into her borrowed clothes, the sun had set. She made her way downstairs to find the dining room already occupied by several boarders, two older gentlemen who appeared to be business partners. A young man, she guessed, was a clerk from his ink-stained fingers, and a middle-aged woman introduced as the town seamstress. Virginia was welcomed warmly and immediately peppered with questions about her journey. With careful editing, she shared her story of traveling west for teaching opportunities, the stagecoach attack, and her rescue by Finley Hayes. She omitted the auction block, unwilling to relive that humiliation. "Typical Finley," remarked one of the older gentlemen, a Mr. Gardner who owned the general store. "Always appearing just when someone needs help most. Has he lived in Silver Creek long?" Virginia inquired, trying to sound merely curious. "Finley? He doesn't live anywhere as far as I know," replied the seamstress, Miss Holloway. "Comes and goes like a summer storm, always welcome but never stays long." Virginia's heart sank at the confirmation of what she already suspected. Martha brought out a magnificent supper: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and green beans. Virginia ate with appreciation, realizing how much she'd missed proper cooking. They were enjoying apple pie for dessert when the front door opened, and Finley stepped into the dining room, Marshal Daniels at his side. The marshal was a tall, weathered man with a thick mustache and observant eyes. "Evening, folks," Daniels greeted the table. "Hope you don't mind us joining you, Martha." "There's plenty to go around," Martha assured him, hurrying to set two more places. Finley's eyes found Virginia immediately. Something in his expression softened when he saw her, clean and safe at the boarding house table. "Miss Vance," he said with a slight nod. "I see Martha's taken good care of you." "She has," Virginia confirmed. "Though I understand I have you to thank for the arrangements." Finley shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Least I could do." The marshal sat down across from Virginia. "Miss Vance, Finley's told me about your situation. I want you to know you're welcome in Silver Creek." "Thank you, Marshal Daniels." "Call me Tom," the marshal insisted. "Everybody does. And I should think you've been trying to get evidence against that crooked sheriff in Redemption for months. Your testimony might finally give us what we need." Virginia glanced at Finley, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd be happy to help, though I'm not sure what good my word will do." "More than you might think," Tom assured her. "Especially combined with similar accounts from others who have passed through. Justice moves slow out here, but it does move." After supper, the boarders dispersed to their rooms or evening activities. Virginia found herself on the front porch with Finley, watching as lamps were lit along the main street. "Thank you for arranging the boarding house," she said quietly. "But you've already done so much I can't accept more charity." "It's not charity," Finley replied. "It's a loan. Martha tells me the school board is meeting tomorrow. They're still looking for a teacher for the fall term." Virginia's pulse quickened. "Truly, truly. I mentioned to Tom that you're qualified. He's on the school board and promised to put in a good word." "You've thought of everything," Virginia said, touched by his consideration. Finley looked out at the darkening street. "I just want to make sure you'll be all right. Silver Creek is a good place for a fresh start." The unspoken implication hung between them, a good place for her start, not theirs. Virginia pushed down her disappointment. "Will you be leaving soon?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Finley hesitated. "Tom's asked me to stay a while. There's been trouble with cattle rustlers in the area. He could use an extra gun." Hope flared in Virginia's chest. "So you'll be in town for a bit longer, a few weeks at least," Finley confirmed. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Virginia, I want to be clear about something. I don't expect anything from you because of what happened in Redemption. You don't owe me your time or attention." Virginia met his gaze steadily. "I know that, Finley, but perhaps I'd like to give it freely." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise certainly, but also a warmth that made Virginia's heart beat faster. Before he could respond, Martha called from inside. "Virginia, dear. I've brought down that trunk of clothes I mentioned." The moment broken, Virginia sighed. "I should go. Martha's been so kind." Finley nodded. "Of course. I'll be staying at the hotel across the street if you need anything." "Will I see you tomorrow?" Virginia couldn't help asking. A small smile touched his lips. "I expect so. Sleep well, Virginia." As she turned to go inside, Finley's voice stopped her once more. "Virginia," she looked back. "Yes. I'm glad I found you in Redemption, too." The simple statement carried a weight of meaning that followed Virginia upstairs as she helped Martha sort through the trunk of clothes. By the time she retired to her room, Virginia had several serviceable dresses, undergarments, and even a pair of sturdy boots that fit reasonably well. Lying in the unfamiliar bed, Virginia reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. A week ago, she'd been a solitary traveler with uncertain prospects. Now she was in Silver Creek, with potential employment, comfortable lodging, and the unexpected companionship of a man who intrigued and attracted her more with each passing hour. It was too soon for such feelings, she knew. They'd known each other barely 2 days. Yet Virginia couldn't deny the connection she felt with Finley Hayes, a connection that seemed to transcend time and circumstances. As she drifted toward sleep, Virginia wondered if he felt it too. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with the scent of pine and wood smoke drifting through Virginia's open window. She dressed in one of Martha's daughter's gowns, a simple blue cotton that needed only minor adjustments at the waist, and went downstairs for breakfast. The dining room was mostly empty, the other boarders having already departed for their daily activities. Martha bustled in from the kitchen with a pot of coffee. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well." "Wonderfully," Virginia assured her, accepting a steaming cup. "I can't remember the last time I had such a comfortable bed." "Glad to hear it. Now, eat up, you've got a busy day ahead. The school board meets at 10 o'clock in the church hall. Marshal Daniels sent word he'd escort you there." Virginia nearly choked on her coffee. "Today." "But I haven't prepared anything," Martha chuckled. "Silver Creek isn't formal, dear. Just be yourself. They're desperate for a qualified teacher before the term starts next month." After breakfast, Virginia found herself pacing nervously in her room. What if the school board found her lacking? Her credentials were solid: 5 years teaching at the Louisville Academy for Young Ladies, but she had no references with her, no proof of her experience. A knock at the front door interrupted her worrying. Virginia peered out her window to see Marshall Daniels on the porch below, hat in hand. She took a deep breath, smoothed her borrowed dress, and descended the stairs. "Morning, Miss Vance," Tom greeted her. "Ready to meet the school board?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Virginia admitted, "though I wish I had more time to prepare." "Don't fret," Tom advised as they walked toward the church. "The board's just 3 people, Reverend Parker, Mr. Simmons the banker, and myself. We're not looking for fancy Eastern education, just someone who can teach reading, writing, and arithmetic to a bunch of ranch kids." "I can certainly do that," Virginia assured him. "I've taught children from 5 to 16. That's exactly what we need to hear." As they approached the white clapboard church, Virginia noticed Finley leaning against a hitching post outside. Her heart skipped at the sight of him, clean-shaven and wearing a fresh shirt beneath his usual denim jacket. "Finley," she greeted him, unable to hide her pleasure. "I didn't expect to see you here. Thought you might want moral support," he explained, falling into step beside them. "Besides, I've got business with Tom afterward." Tom gave Finley a knowing look that Virginia couldn't quite interpret. "Right, business." Inside the church hall, Virginia met Reverend Parker, a kindly man with spectacles and an impressive beard, and Mr. Simmons, whose stern demeanor was belied by the warmth in his eyes when he smiled. The interview proceeded better than Virginia had dared hope. She spoke of her experience teaching in Louisville, her educational philosophy, and her belief that every child, regardless of background, deserved access to learning. When asked about teaching methods, Virginia described her approach to different learning styles and the importance of practical applications alongside book learning. "What about discipline?" Mr. Simmons inquired. "Some of our older boys can be challenging." "I believe in firm but fair consequences," Virginia replied. "Respect is earned, not demanded. In my experience, students respond best when they understand the purpose behind their education." Reverend Parker nodded approvingly. "Well said, Miss Vance." Throughout the interview, Virginia was acutely aware of Finley sitting quietly at the back of the room. His presence gave her confidence, though she couldn't have explained why. Finally, after nearly an hour, Tom stood. "I believe we've heard all we need, Miss Vance. Would you mind waiting outside while we confer?" Virginia nodded and stepped out into the sunshine, Finley following. They stood in companionable silence beside the church, watching as townsfolk went about their morning business. "You did well in there," Finley observed. "How would you know?" Virginia teased. "You've never seen me teach." "No, but I've seen you handle yourself in far more difficult situations than a school board interview. You've got grit, Virginia Vance." The compliment warmed her. "Thank you, though I'm still nervous." "Without references, they'd be fools not to hire you," Finley interrupted. "And whatever else they might be, Tom Daniels and Reverend Parker aren't fools." Before Virginia could respond, the church door opened, and the 3 board members emerged. "Miss Vance," Reverend Parker said formally, "we'd like to offer you the position of teacher for Silver Creek School, beginning the first Monday of September. The salary is $40 a month. With lodging included, there's a small house behind the schoolhouse for the teacher's use." Joy and relief flooded Virginia. "I accept," she said without hesitation. "Thank you for your trust." "Excellent," Tom exclaimed. "Judith at the dress shop has the key to the teacher's house. You can move in whenever you're ready." "This calls for a celebration," Mr. Simmons declared. "The Silver Creek Hotel is serving a special Sunday dinner tomorrow. You must be our guest, Miss Vance." "That's very kind," Virginia began, but Simmons was already shaking his head. "I insist. 2 o'clock tomorrow. The whole town will want to meet our new schoolmarm." He glanced at Finley. "You'll make sure she attends, Hayes." Finley's lips twitched with amusement. "Yes, sir." As the board members dispersed, Virginia turned to Finley, unable to contain her excitement. "I can't believe it. A position, a house, everything I hoped for when I came west." "You earned it," Finley said simply. "Now, how about I show you this teacher's house you'll be calling home?" They walked together toward the schoolhouse at the edge of town. The building itself was new, constructed of sturdy pine with large windows to admit plenty of light. Behind it stood a smaller structure, a neat cottage with a small porch and garden plot. Judith from the dress shop met them there with the key. She was a plump, cheerful woman who immediately assured Virginia that the ladies' sewing circle would help her settle in. "We've kept it clean," Judith explained as she unlocked the door, "but it needs a woman's touch. The last teacher was a young man who barely knew which end of a broom to hold." The cottage was simple but charming, one main room combining kitchen and living area, a small bedroom, and a lean-to addition that housed a wash area. The furniture was basic but solid. A bed, a table with 4 chairs, a small sofa, and several bookshelves. "It's perfect," Virginia breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "The stove works well," Judith assured her. "And there's a pump out back for water. Chamber pot under the bed, of course, and the necessary is behind the garden." After Judith left, Virginia continued exploring her new home, running her fingers along the bookshelves, testing the mattress, opening cupboards. Finley watched from the doorway, an unreadable expression on his face. "What do you think?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "I think you belong here," he said quietly. "It suits you." The simple observation touched Virginia deeply. "Thank you for making this possible, Finley. Without you," he shook his head, stopping her. "You'd have found your way eventually. You're too capable not to." "Perhaps," Virginia conceded. "But I'm grateful it happened this way." Their eyes met, and that now familiar current passed between them. Finley took a step toward her, then hesitated. "I should let you get settled," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Tom's expecting me back at his office." Virginia nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, the cattle rustlers." "Right." Finley adjusted his hat. "Will you be all right here?" "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Martha mentioned she'd help me move my things this afternoon." Finley nodded. "I'll see you tomorrow then." For the dinner. After he left, Virginia stood in the center of her new home, feelings tumbling through her like leaves in a whirlwind. Joy at her new position, gratitude for the kindness of strangers, and beneath it all, a growing awareness that her feelings for Finley Hayes had progressed well beyond simple appreciation. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Martha arrived with several other ladies, bearing linens, kitchenware, and other necessities for Virginia's cottage. By evening, the little house felt lived in and welcoming, with curtains at the windows, a braided rug on the floor, and a pantry stocked with basic provisions. "It's tradition," Martha explained when Virginia protested the gifts. "Silver Creek takes care of its own, and you're one of us now." That night, alone in her new home, Virginia sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the deepening sky. The events of the past week seemed almost dreamlike in their improbability. From captivity on an auction block to freedom and a teaching position, all because a stranger had given everything he possessed to save her. But Finley Hayes wasn't a stranger anymore. In the brief time they'd known each other, Virginia had come to respect his quiet strength, admire his unwavering moral compass, and if she was honest with herself, yearn for something more than friendship. Yet he was a man with restless feet, as Miss Holloway had put it. When the cattle rustlers were caught, Finley would likely ride on, seeking new horizons. Virginia had to prepare herself for that inevitability. Despite these sobering thoughts, Virginia went to bed that night filled with a sense of possibility. For the first time in years, she had a home, a purpose, and a community. Whatever happened with Finley, she would be all right. Sunday dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the special dinner at the Silver Creek Hotel. Virginia spent the morning arranging her few possessions and exploring the schoolhouse, already planning lessons for the coming term. At 1:30, a knock at her door revealed Finley, dressed in his cleanest clothes, dark trousers, a fresh white shirt, and a vest she hadn't seen before. He'd even polished his boots. "You look very handsome," Virginia said before she could stop herself. Finley's ears reddened slightly. "And you look beautiful," he returned, eyes taking in her appearance. Virginia had done her best with what was available. She wore one of Martha's daughter's dresses, a light green cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. She'd arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style, with soft curls framing her face. "Shall we?" Finley offered his arm, and Virginia took it, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at his touch. The Silver Creek Hotel was the largest building in town, a two-story structure with a wide veranda and tall windows. Inside, the dining room had been arranged for the occasion, with tables pushed together to form one long communal setting. Virginia was introduced to what seemed like the entire population of Silver Creek ranchers and their wives, shopkeepers, the town doctor and his family, and many others whose names blurred together. Everyone welcomed her warmly, expressing relief that the school would open on schedule and curiosity about the Eastern lady who would be teaching their children. Throughout the meal, a sumptuous spread of roast beef, chicken, various vegetables, and 3 kinds of pie. Virginia was conscious of Finley beside her. He spoke little, but his steady presence gave her confidence as she navigated the social waters of her new community. After dinner, Reverend Parker gave a brief welcome speech, formally introducing Virginia as Silver Creek's new teacher. She stood and expressed her gratitude, promising to do her best for the children entrusted to her care. As the gathering began to disperse, Tom Daniels approached with a serious expression. "Finley, got word of rustlers hitting the Peterson place last night. I need to ride out there and assess the damage. You coming?" Finley nodded, his demeanor shifting instantly from social companion to professional. "When do we leave?" "Within the hour. Could be gone overnight." Virginia tried to hide her disappointment as Finley turned to her. "I'm sorry to cut this short." "Don't apologize," she said quickly. "You have responsibilities. I understand." "I'll walk you home first," he insisted. They left the hotel together, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the main street. Virginia was acutely aware that this might be the last time she'd see Finley for days or longer if the rustlers led them on a chase. "Be careful," she said when they reached her cottage. "I've heard cattle rustlers can be dangerous." "They can be," Finley acknowledged. "But Tom and I have dealt with worse." Virginia nodded, unsure what else to say. How did one bid farewell to a man who had saved her life, changed her future, and stolen her heart in less than a week? Finley seemed to be wrestling with his own thoughts. He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Virginia, when I get back. Could we talk?" "Of course," she replied, her pulse quickening. "About what?" "About—" Finley hesitated. "About possibilities." Before Virginia could ask what he meant, Finley leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss so gentle it was almost reverent. Then he stepped back, replacing his hat. "I'll see you soon," he promised, his voice husky. Virginia stood on her porch, fingers touching her lips in wonder as she watched him stride away. "Possibilities," he'd said. The word echoed in her mind, filling her with both hope and trepidation. For the first time since meeting Finley Hayes, Virginia allowed herself to imagine a future where their paths didn't diverge, where the restless cowboy found reason to stay. The next 3 days passed with agonizing slowness for Virginia. She kept busy preparing the schoolhouse for the coming term, organizing books, cleaning desks, and planning lessons. In the evenings, she joined Martha and the other ladies for Sewing Circle, where she was regaled with town history and gentle inquiries about that handsome Mr. Hayes. Virginia deflected these questions with practiced skill, unwilling to share the tender moment they'd shared or her growing fears, as Finley's absence stretched from 1 day to 3. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Virginia was in the schoolhouse, writing arithmetic problems on the blackboard, when she heard horses approaching. She hurried to the window in time to see a group of riders coming down the main street. Tom Daniels, Finley, and 2 other men escorting 3 roughly dressed individuals with hands bound. Relief flooded through her at the sight of Finley, apparently unharmed. She watched as the group stopped at the jail, the prisoners dismounting under close guard. Virginia returned to her work, determined not to appear too eager. Finley would come find her when he was ready. She had just finished the arithmetic problems when a knock at the schoolhouse door made her heart leap. It wasn't Finley, but Tom Daniels, who stood there, hat in hand. "Miss Vance," he greeted her. "Got a moment?" "Of course, Marshall. Please come in. Is everything all right?" Tom entered, looking uncomfortable. "Yes and no. We caught the rustlers, as you probably saw, but there was a bit of trouble." Virginia's stomach clenched. "Finley, he's alive," Tom assured her quickly, "but he took a bullet in the shoulder. Doc Miller's patching him up now." Virginia was already reaching for her shawl. "How serious is it?" "Not life-threatening, but painful. Bullet went clean through, which is a mercy." Tom hesitated. "He's been asking for you." Those 5 words sent Virginia's pulse racing. "Take me to him, please." They hurried to the doctor's small office behind his home. Inside, the air smelled of carbolic acid and medicinal herbs. Doc Miller, a white-haired man with kind eyes and steady hands, was just finishing bandaging Finley's shoulder. Finley sat shirtless on an examination table, his face pale but composed. When he saw Virginia, relief washed over his features. "I told Tom not to worry you," he said, his voice stronger than she'd expected. Virginia approached the table, fighting the urge to touch him, to reassure herself he was truly all right. "He didn't worry me. He simply informed me that you'd been foolish enough to get yourself shot." A ghost of a smile touched Finley's lips. "It wasn't intentional, I assure you." Doc Miller snorted. "Never is. Yet you fellows keep finding ways to get lead in you." He turned to Virginia. "He'll be fine, Miss Vance. Bullet missed anything important. He needs rest, clean bandages, and someone to make sure he doesn't try to ride out after more outlaws for at least a week." "I can manage that," Virginia said firmly. Tom cleared his throat. "Finley's been staying at the hotel, but that's no place for a man recovering from a gunshot wound. No one to look after him properly." Virginia understood the unspoken question. It wasn't entirely proper for her to care for Finley. She wasn't his wife or family, but Silver Creek was practical about such matters. "He can stay at my cottage," she decided. "I'll take the sofa and he can have the bedroom." Finley started to protest, but Virginia silenced him with a look. "Don't argue, Mr. Hayes. You saved my life once. Allow me to return the favor." Despite Finley's insistence that he could walk, Tom and Doc Miller helped him into a wagon for the short journey to Virginia's cottage. By the time they settled him on her bed, Finley's face was beaded with sweat, his jaw tight with pain. "I've left laudanum for the pain," Doc Miller told Virginia. 2 drops in water, no more than every 6 hours. Keep the wound clean, change the bandages daily, and send word if fever develops. After the men left, Virginia found herself alone with Finley. He lay against her pillows, eyes closed, chest rising and falling with careful breaths. "You should have stayed at the hotel," he murmured without opening his eyes. "This isn't proper." "Proper is a luxury we can't always afford on the frontier," Virginia replied, pouring water into a basin. "Besides, what would be truly improper would be leaving you without proper care when I'm perfectly capable of providing it." She dipped a cloth in the cool water and gently wiped his forehead. Finley's eyes opened at her touch, his gaze intense despite his weakened state. "Thank you," he said simply. Virginia smiled. "Rest now. We'll talk when you're stronger." For the next 3 days, Virginia divided her time between preparing the schoolhouse and caring for Finley. His recovery progressed well, the wound showed no signs of infection. And by the 3rd day, he was strong enough to sit up and take meals at the table. They developed a comfortable routine, with Virginia reading aloud in the evenings, first from newspapers, then from a volume of Tennyson's poetry she'd found on the cottage's bookshelves. Finley proved to be an attentive listener, occasionally offering surprising insights into the verses. On the 4th evening, as twilight painted the sky in watercolor hues, they sat together on the small porch. Finley had insisted on moving outside, claiming he needed fresh air, though Virginia suspected he was simply tired of being confined. "How's the shoulder?" she asked, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Better every day," Finley replied. "Thanks to your care," Virginia smiled. "I'm glad, though I must say when you mentioned possibilities before you left, I didn't envision playing nurse to a wounded cowboy." Finley's expression grew serious. "No, I expect you didn't." He set down his coffee cup. "Virginia, there's something I need to tell you about why I was in Redemption that day." Virginia's heart quickened. "I assumed it was chance." "Not entirely," Finley admitted. "I was there looking for someone." "Oh." Virginia tried to keep her voice neutral, though a tendril of unease curled in her stomach. Finley met her eyes directly. "After the war, I drifted. Did whatever work I could find, ranching, bounty hunting, scouting. Never stayed anywhere long. But last year, Tom Daniels made me an offer. Silver Creek needed a lawman, someone to help him keep the peace as the town grows." Virginia blinked in surprise. "He offered you a job as a deputy." "More than that," Finley explained. "He's planning to retire next spring, wanted me to take over as marshal." "And you declined?" Virginia guessed. "I told him I needed time to consider it. It would mean putting down roots, something I haven't done since the war." Finley's eyes held hers. "I rode to Redemption to clear my head, think about what I really wanted." Understanding dawned on Virginia. "Then you saw me on that auction block." "And suddenly," Finley said softly, "the decision seemed simpler. I knew what kind of man I wanted to be, the kind who doesn't ride past injustice, the kind who might be worthy of a place like Silver Creek." Virginia's heart pounded as the implications of his words sank in. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I've accepted Tom's offer," Finley confirmed. "I'm staying in Silver Creek, and I'm hoping— That is, I wondered if you might consider—" He faltered, uncharacteristically uncertain. Virginia reached across the space between them to take his hand. "Consider what, Finley?" He took a deep breath. "Courting. Properly. I know we haven't known each other long, but these past days, sharing this cottage, talking with you, being cared for by you, I've never felt more at home anywhere." Joy blossomed in Virginia's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "I'd like that very much," she whispered. Finley's fingers tightened around hers. "I can't offer much. A lawman's life isn't easy or particularly safe." "I don't need easy," Virginia assured him. "I just need honest." "And you, Finley Hayes, are the most honest man I've ever known." In the gathering dusk, Finley leaned toward her, his free hand gently cupping her cheek. This second kiss was different from their first, slower, deeper, a promise rather than a question. Virginia's heart soared as she returned it, all her doubts melting away in the warmth of his touch. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Finley kept her hand in his. "I never expected to find you," he said wonderingly. "When I rode into redemption that day, I had no idea my life was about to change." "Nor I," Virginia replied. "Though standing on that auction block, I admit my expectations were rather low." Finley's expression darkened at the memory. "I've sent word to federal authorities about that sheriff and his auction block. With luck, he'll face justice soon." "You spent every cent you had," Virginia reminded him. "Your money, your watch, everything." "Best investment I ever made," Finley said simply. As night fell completely, they remained on the porch, talking of the future of the school term beginning soon, of Finley's upcoming duties as deputy, of the growing town around them. For the first time since the war had upended both their lives, they dared to plan beyond the next day or week. 2 months later, on a crisp October morning, Virginia stood beside Finley in Silver Creek's church. Reverend Parker beamed at them as he pronounced them husband and wife. The building was packed with townsfolk, Virginia's students and their families, ranchers, shopkeepers, and in the front row, Tom Daniels wearing his Sunday best. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Parker announced. As Finley leaned down to claim his kiss, Virginia's heart overflowed with gratitude for the strange, terrible circumstances that had brought them together. From an auction block in Redemption to the altar in Silver Creek, a journey neither could have imagined, yet one that now seemed somehow inevitable. The celebration afterward was typically Western in its enthusiasm: abundant food, music from local fiddle players, dancing until dusk. Virginia found herself constantly surrounded by well-wishers, particularly her students, who were delighted that their teacher was marrying the deputy marshal. "Mrs. Hayes," Finley murmured during a rare private moment as they danced. "How does it sound?" Virginia smiled up at her husband. "Perfect, though my students will need time to adjust from Miss Vance." "They'll manage," Finley assured her. "Children are adaptable." "Speaking of children," Virginia began, then hesitated. Finley's step faltered. "Virginia, is there something you need to tell me?" She laughed at his expression. "No, not yet, but someday, I hope." Relief and tenderness mingled in Finley's eyes. "Someday," he agreed. "A houseful, if you're willing." "A houseful might be ambitious," Virginia teased, "but 2 or 3 would be nice." As the celebration continued around them, Virginia reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. She had left Kentucky seeking a new beginning, never imagining that her darkest hour, bound and standing on an auction block, would lead to her greatest joy. And Finley, who had spent every coin he possessed to free her, had gained something far more valuable than gold or silver. He had found a home, a purpose, and a love neither of them had dared to dream possible. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noting her thoughtful expression. Virginia smiled. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us exactly where we need to be." "To Silver Creek," Finley guessed. "To you," Virginia corrected softly. "Always to you." 2 years later, Virginia sat on the porch of their expanded cottage, now a proper house, with 2 bedrooms, watching as Finley taught their 1-year-old son to take his first tentative steps across the garden. Thomas Daniel Hayes had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. "That's it, Tommy," Finley encouraged, arms outstretched. "Come to Papa." The child wobbled, then took 3 decisive steps before collapsing into his father's waiting arms. Finley scooped him up, tossing him gently into the air as Tommy shrieked with delight. "He's going to be running before we know it," Virginia observed, one hand resting on her rounded belly where their second child grew. "Just like his father, always moving." Finley carried Tommy to the porch, settling beside Virginia on the swing Reverend Parker had crafted as a wedding gift. "Not always," he countered, placing a kiss on her forehead. "I found my place to stand still." "Marshall Hayes," a voice called from the street. A young boy on a pinto pony reined in at their gate. "Ma says to tell you Miss Johnson's having her baby and Doc Miller's out at the Peterson Ranch with a broken arm case." Finley nodded. "Tell your ma I'll fetch Martha Wilson and be right there." As the boy galloped off, Finley handed Tommy to Virginia. "Duty calls," he said apologetically. Virginia smiled. "Go. Mrs. Johnson needs Martha's midwifery skills, and Martha will need your strong back to carry her supplies." Finley hesitated. "Will you be all right?" With Tommy, and his eyes dropped to her belly. "We'll be fine," Virginia assured him. "We always are." With a quick kiss for her and another for Tommy, Finley strode toward Martha's boarding house. Virginia watched him go, her heart full. In Silver Creek, they had built not just a home but a life, one rich with purpose, community, and love. From that terrible day in Redemption, when she stood bound on an auction block, to this peaceful evening on her own porch, Virginia's journey had been unlikely, often difficult but ultimately blessed. And Finley, who had emptied his pockets to free her, had gained a wealth beyond measure in return. As Tommy babbled happily in her lap, Virginia whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the mysterious ways of Providence and for a blue-eyed cowboy who had given everything he possessed to save a stranger. In that selfless act, he had not just purchased her freedom, he had found his own. Together, they had discovered that the truest freedom comes not from restless wandering, but from the courage to stand still, to belong, and to love without reservation. And in Silver Creek, surrounded by the community that had embraced them both, Finley and Virginia Hayes had found their forever home.